The Triathlon Show 306. Hey, what's up everybody, and welcome back to another episode of That Triathlon Show, the podcast presented by scientifictriathlon.com. I'm your host Michael, and on today's episode I interview 5 different coaches to get a broad perspective on one important topic, workout fueling. Each of the coaches will answer basically the same questions centered around the topic of workout fueling, and the whole idea of this is that you can get a sense of the commonalities, but also the nuances and differences in thinking around workout fueling. And at the end of the episode, I will give you my personal thinking, not in detail, but as a rapid fire overview. So the coaches I'm going to talk to today are all top class coaches of top class athletes. They are highly respected generally and by myself. They've each been on That Triathlon Show before, and I'll of course link to all of those previous episodes in the episode description and the show notes. And they are Frank Jakobsen from Denmark, Val Burke from Canada, living in New Zealand, Colin Moore from the United States, Ryan Bolton, also from the United States, and Bjorn Kafka from Germany. And you will hear them in that order right after we thank our sponsors. First, we have precision hydration that create electrolyte products that you can match to how you sweat, and fueling products that make it easy for you to hit your numbers. Each serving contains 30 grams of carbohydrate. When it comes to electrolytes and sodium in particular, remember that we all have different sweat rates, and we also have very different sweat sodium concentrations. For example, I personally lose more than 2,000 milligrams of sodium per liter of sweat, which is a lot. And on the bike, for example, in a race, I sweat around 1.5 liters per hour, a bit depending on the environmental conditions, of course. And my aim is generally to replace around 70% of the sodium that I lose, which means that I would need to consume at least 4,200 milligrams of sodium just on the bike in a 7.3 race, and more so depending on how fast or slow, depending on how slow the course is, that is. On the other hand, somebody who loses 500 milligrams per liter of sweat, 500 milligrams of sodium that is, and sweats at a rate of 0.8 liters per hour, they would need to replace about 8 times less than I would for the same duration out on the course. So knowing your individual numbers is crucial, and Precision Hydration's product and free online sweat test or advanced in-person sweat tests make it easy for you to figure out what you should do when it comes to electrolytes. You can use the promo code THATTRIATHLONSHOW15 to get 15% off your first order of electrolytes or energy products on precisionhydration.com. And thank you to Zen8. The Zen8 indoor swim trainer is a swim training tool that you can use at home, allowing you to improve your technique, work on power and stamina, and save time and stay consistent. Consistency is crucially important, but sometimes it is tough to find the time to get to the pool. It is time consuming. So to have an efficient way to get in quick but effective sessions at home is invaluable. With the Zen8 Swim Trainer, you can do just that. And in addition, you can use it to do things like swim, bike, brick workouts, which are difficult to do otherwise, and to work on perfect core activations and streamline with the help of the built-in instability element of the swim bench. The Zen8 Swim Trainer also does not take up a lot of space. It is inflatable, in fact, so you can store it very small and neat, and it is very affordable, and even more so with a 20% discount code that you can get on zen8swimtrainer.com/TTS. Now, without any further ado, let's get into interview number 1 with coach Frank Jakobsen, who coaches athletes such as Jesper Svensson, Sara Svensk, and has worked with Craig Alexander when he was winning world titles. And importantly, he's also involved in the Scientific Triathlon training camp in Mallorca, but more on that at the end of this episode. But either way, Frank is a great coach working with many professional athletes, tons of experience, so it will be interesting to hear what he has to say. I'm here with Frank Jakobsen to discuss workout fueling. Welcome to the podcast, Frank. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. Thank you for inviting me to the world's best triathlon podcast.
It's my pleasure. It will be really interesting to hear your thoughts on this. I know that you have done a lot of work and have a lot of experience with workout fueling that we'll discuss. So do you want to just start by summarizing some general thoughts and recommendations that you have on this topic?
I can do that. Okay, let's see what's the general thoughts on this. Yeah, well, the general thoughts I think is actually good to that's a good question, because that's the foundation of the decisions you make on your thing. So a very general answer must be, let me phrase it right. Start by understanding what's your weakness and your strength in the sport compared to your goals. Then decide what you want to do, what you want to develop of these strengths and weaknesses. Some people say that train to your weakness and race on your strength. Like, okay, but decide it. Make a good evaluation of it. Then decide what you want to do. Then, when you have decided what you want to develop for the coming season or race season or like that, then try to understand how you're going to do that. Specifically, how are you actually going to develop run speed or endurance on the bike or strength or whatever. And then when you have that, then you put on the nutrition as a supporting factor towards what you are developing and how you're developing it.
Can you give some example of that in practice? Maybe a hypothetical athlete or an actual case study, like how you look at somebody that you've coached and what they needed to develop and how the nutrition then fell into place based on knowledge of that those strengths and weaknesses.
You can just choose thinking examples. Easy examples are if you are an athlete who are very good on the swim, very strong on the bike, and you're running too slow because of the fact that you're simply too big. I mean, let's say a little bit overweight, whatever. Then you would want to lose weight, and losing weight, you want to lose, let's say, 3 kilos of fat of your weight. Okay, that is a specific weakness that comes out in the run, especially, and you decide that that's what I'm going to do, and now you find out how am I going to do it, and obviously nutrition plays a huge part in that development, and then you have to adjust your nutrition and your training to fit so that over 3 months or 6 months or whatever, you will lose 3 to 5 kilos of fat. So that's obvious. Now, if you take a person and say that, well, I'm really skinny and I'm sinking in the water because I have so low body fat and I'm not strong enough on the bike. I can bike 90K, but I can't bike 180. And I simply don't have enough endurance. And when I train long, I forget to eat. And maybe that's why I'm too skinny. And then on the run, I all the time get injured because I have so low fat percentage and I'm pressing my body so much. So I get small injuries all the time. Okay, you want to get more robust. You want to get more resilient and like that. And you actually still want to do Ironman. Okay, good. So I need to put on some muscle to my weight. I need to build muscle. And again, so you have defined that what is a little bit your problem. And then again, you put on your training nutrition as a help to how you're going to train. And without thinking the nutrition into it, your results will not be the same. So these are two very simple, of course.
Yes. And would you say in these two examples that would the differences be very big between how they fuel in the workouts, or would it be bigger outside of the workouts in the rest of their day-to-day, or would it be both?
So the one who should lose weight, for instance, both the training itself would be different for a given period of the year. So you also have to think in the periodization of the year. So if you take 12 months, you're of course not going to. What I see sometimes if we talk about losing weight, now we went there. I don't know why I went there, but because it's actually not that interesting. But it's a very easy example because many people think of it. So, but I see people 6 weeks or 2 months before a race saying that, yeah, and I also just want to lose a little bit weight. Yeah, but you know what? 2 months before an Ironman race, you are just entering the 2 times 3 weeks block. That is the most grueling training, preparing you for this one-day event. If you have not lost weight by this time, this is not the time to lose weight. Done deal. You might lose half a kilo, maximum 1 kilo during this 6 weeks final preparation period. But if you're losing more than that, you are not able to sustain the training and you risk getting sick or injured, So losing fat as weight has to be put into the periodization, and that the training in that period is also different than the training the last 2 months leading into an Ironman, from my take anyway.
Yeah, so when you're in a heavy block of training, it would be very similar for these two athletes, but maybe in the base training phase or so in the winter, they might fuel very, very differently. Even the training might be very different. So that makes sense.
We run camps, open camps, like kind of for groups, and there's in Mallorca for 3 months every spring. And it's a common thing that people come down and they actually think that, okay, now I'm here and I actually booked 2 weeks instead of 1. So I'm going to train a lot these 2 weeks. And if I talk with them at the dinner table in the evening, it's a general thing. It's common to hear people say, yeah, I really want to, I train well, but now I really want to get fit. And I also want to lose a couple of kilos, and they say it in one sentence, like, I'm going to train really hard and I'm also going to lose weight. And I just tell them straight out, forget the last part, my friend, because with that in mind, when you're out on the bike, you're not going to eat enough. When you come to the dinner table in the evening, you're so hungry, then you are going to eat. And then next day, and I see people who actually go to the dessert table and they take cake and they take everything because they're so hungry if they've been training 6 hours in the day. So they eat cake. And then in their mind, the next day, they eat less when they go for another 6-hour ride in the mountains. They eat less nutrition. They take less nutrition on the bike because they are thinking that, but the cake I ate yesterday I got to burn because I also wanted to lose weight on this camp. And then you start to be counterproductive for training stimulus, because if you want to build on your endurance, the last 2 hours on the 6-hour ride is determining a lot of that. Now, if you're running lower on glycogen in your body to push the power into the pedals, and you're just pushing on fat, well, fat is 3 times slower to turn into energy as carbohydrates. And that means you can only sustain a certain pace. You will drop in pace and power output on the bike. And that means you are not pressing so much, so you're not pressing your muscles so much. Does it make sense? I mean, now
absolutely.
It's really fast. Yeah, you understand it. So this is the point, is that you make up your mind, what is it I'm trying to achieve, and how is my nutrition supporting that goal? I want to get really strong and build my endurance on the bike. Okay, you're going to go for long rides. Well, my friend, the first 3 hours of a 6-hour ride, if you eat much too little carbohydrates and like that, then you're not able to hold a high power output on the last 2-3 hours. That means you get less training stimulus. You feel that you are really fighting, and you come home and say, fuck, I did a good training because I really was struggling the last 2 hours, but I made it. And you look at your power. Your power is going to tell you what you put. Your mind tells you that you really pushed, but your power is low. And that's because you are fighting to push with low fast energy in your body. So it's you're a little bit fooling yourself. But that is if your goal is to push and build endurance and like that.
Yeah. Well, let's stick with that goal, because I agree. I think that's more interesting, the building endurance, building fitness, rather than losing weight. So let's here in this example also say that, we are maybe in the final 2 months out from whatever a big race. It might be a Circle 3 or an Ironman. It doesn't really matter. But you're not in January. You're in a phase where the training is important and geared towards your racing. So in that situation, do you have general or recommendations around how much to consume in different types of workouts? How much carbohydrates to consume per hour, for example?
I mean, it's a little bit, again, the purpose. If the purpose is to get ready for the race, you're happy with your weight, then there's the last thing, is that in the race, of course, we also want to be able to, especially in an Ironman race, we are running into trouble on the nutrition, because normally athletes, they burn such a big amount of carbohydrates from the muscles and the liver and what you are taking in, that you actually get close to the running out. What does it mean when you run out? That you boink? No, that's not what it means. It means that you run out of the glycose sitting in your muscle fibers, and those who are most accessible for to get into your mitochondria and move your body and so forth. So we also want to be efficient at race pace. So it's a really difficult balance, because you want to be able to use fat as fuel. It's 3 times more valuable. It has a multiple 3 compared to carbohydrates in in the speed that it's being burned. So it means sugar will burn at rate 100. Well, then it takes 300 seconds to move the fat into the cell. But we are moving pretty slow in an Ironman, so fat is a good fuel. If we are talking Olympic race, it's different. But if we talk long distance, and especially Ironman, you actually want to use fat as an energy source. You are using it, but you... So my point is, if you are at your race pace on your bike and you're using 80% of your fuel is coming from sugar, well, if you during training can alter that, and then 70% of carbs or even 60% of your fuel at race pace on the bike comes from carbohydrates, that means that you have to digest less into your body through your stomach and your digestive system, which is really hard to do during the race. And you're also using less of the carbohydrates that you have in the liver and in your muscle fibers from the start of the race. This means that you get further on the run before you start to run in trouble, and you might even get to the finish line. So what you want to do is you want to get to the finish line without getting into trouble and running out of carbohydrates, sugar, glucose, whatever you want to call it, the fastest energy source for moving. And thereby you want to be efficient in fat burning. So we are trying to balance teaching the body to use fat, and at the same time using enough energy in training to stimulate the body to press the muscular system and the whole system enough to be more fit and strong. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. Yeah, it makes great sense in theory. Could you give an example of what that might then look like in terms of a long ride, for example, and how much somebody might consume? And of course, it depends. But you can give an example of what this athlete kind of is like.
Okay, now we measure this athlete. So we take this athlete and we measure the person and we say, okay, you want to do 220 watts on your Ironman pace, or you want to do 280, or you want to do 300. Now we're getting up into the pro. So let's take the easy one. We take an age group, you want to do 220. Okay, now we put him in a lab and we measure him with a good equipment that measures the two gases, and we find out, okay, at 220, 80% of your energy source is carbohydrates. Is that high? Yeah, that's pretty high. So there's two ways. Either you adjust your goal of how much you want to put in the pedals and go to 200. We measure you again, and at 200 watts, you're spending 70% of your fuel is coming from sugar. Okay, but you say, well, to be competitive, I have to do 220. Okay, so we keep 220, and you can actually push 220, and you can do it in the race. Okay, now we start saying that, well, you're strong enough to push 220, but you are going to run out of carbohydrates, glycogen, during the run. If you do this on the bike and you run at this pace, you're simply going to run out of energy source of carbohydrates. You're going to go low on it, so low that it will have an impact on your pace. Okay, now during a week, we will tell you to bike 180K, taking everything from 60 to 120 grams of carbohydrate, depending how big the person is. How much is he actually burning? So we will train from 60 up to 120 grams, depending on what he needs, and how much can he take and what kind of energy. And other days in the week, 1 or 2 days, we might say, okay, now you're going to bike 3 hours without energy. You're just going to bike at race pace 3 hours, and you are then forcing your body to take in fat as a source in the last, let's say, probably 1.5 hours of that ride. We are pressing your system to use fat because you're going to run out of carbohydrates and glycogen. So we will force you to use fat. That is training the body's metabolism to what source it's using at what pace. You can also tell a person to go 6 hours, and then the person will have a hell of a time. It's really hard like that, but you will train. Then you can go into what we call the fat max zone area and say, okay, you're going to ride at this pace, and you're still going to do it without taking any carbohydrates during the morning and even during the whole ride. So then you get more efficient in using fat. If you do that for a month, you can alter from, let's say, 80 to 70%, depending what you eat outside and inside and like that.
And how many times per week? So would you do it 1 time per week at race pace and 1 time at fat max, or how many times roughly per week would you do that sort of restricted carbohydrate training?
that I would do if it's depending if it's a girl or a man. If it's a girl, I would be very careful with it. If it's a man and the number is bad, I mean, like the person is really depending of carbohydrates to do race pace, then we would probably in a period force it a little bit more. But it depends what period it is also. So women maybe not even do it, at least very, very carefully. Injury history to look at that. So what happens when you do it is that you're burning fat instead of carbohydrates. And when you burn fat, you have a multiple of 3 in oxygen delivery. So you need 3 times the amount of oxygen to burn fat as burning carbohydrates. And that means that you make what we call oxidative stress inside the whole environment in your body and in the muscle fibers and everywhere. It means that you're getting lower on. It's hard to get enough oxygen to keep the pace just burning fat, and oxidative stress comes out in the end product of free radicals. Which, if you have too much of it like that over time, you build a risk of inflammation or irritation and injuries and like that. So you have to have that in mind. That some people they go even for this really radical one with ketogenic state where the body starts to alter what it's using for energy, and it's a kind of keto. And well, my experience with it is absolute disastrous because the general rule about that one is that you would per day get maximum 50 grams of carbohydrates in total during the day. Everything else you eat is fat, and thereby you're really altering the body's metabolism. And that means on race day you will then be able to use at race pace 70%, 60% of your energy in theory should then come from fat. It's a stretch for me. The numbers I have seen don't add up, and it puts a huge stress on your body. And if you do it for a long time, what I see is that people actually lose the general absolute power of especially on the bike. They simply start to lose power. The threshold starts to drop, and that means the whole system is dropping. So you will be really efficient at race pace on an Ironman, but as a training stimulus, your metabolism is optimized for endurance, but as a training stimulus, it's really hard to get to work. So the one way you go fully in and try to get a ketogenic state of metabolism in your body and like that, I don't agree on at all. So we use it just some days for some people, and sometimes we even use, let's say, a 6-hour ride where the first 3 or 4 hours we actually do it, and then you start to add carbohydrates, so that at the end where you get a stimulus of the muscle endurance, you actually have energy in your body that you can press the power and the speed on your bike, so that you get both stimulus. You get the fat burning optimization in the first 3-4 hours. Well, after 2 hours, 1.5, 2 hours. And so you get a window where you're working on that, and then you start to use sugar so that you're not just sitting and hanging the last 2 hours on the bike and really not producing any work. This we have seen some results with for some, and for some people, let's say less good results. So, but it's a balance, and it all comes back to the one that if you do too much and too radical of these things, then for me, the results are bad. When you are trying to force your fat burning ability too hard, then a lot of other things starts to go wrong, in my opinion.
Yeah. What about, so let's say we have either an age grouper that trains a lot, like at a very high level, like they train 15 hours or more, or we have a pro athlete that might train 20, 25, 30 hours in a training camp week. And you have maybe a key 6-hour ride, and during that maybe you do your race-based training, as you said, 60 to 120 grams, and you have your fat metabolism ride where you do 3 hours without fueling. What about the rest of the training? Like you have your bread and butter, your 90-minute run, your 2-hour endurance ride, those sorts of things. What are your recommendations for them? They're not necessarily about race pace or about fat burning per se directly, indirectly perhaps, but what would you say that? What would your fueling recommendations be for those types of workouts that are long enough that they might be candidates for fueling?
If you're in big blocks of training, then in general we are fueling pretty high in everything. And that has something to do with that your metabolism simply goes high and stays high in that period. It's not like, okay, on an easy day, my metabolism is very low. And then next day, so as you're stressing your body with, let's say 30 hours of training, then your metabolism is high and you're to repair your body after and like that. And the thing is that we know from clever people in nutrition and science that when you empty your body, if you come back from the ride and you are empty, you run yourself. The typical one is the one where, you filled up and then, okay, now there's a gasoline station, it's too early. Well, I don't go in there, well, let's just go the last piece. Do you have enough? And like, yeah, I have a little bit of water left. And do you have any energy? No. And people sit and start to share gels and like that, everybody's running low. And they're just like, okay, let's hunker up and get home, So for 1 hour, they're just really running themselves into the ground. There is something cool about that, but it's absolutely not productive for the next period of the training block, and especially if you're on a camp. We know that it stresses the immune system highly if you empty yourself, and the recover time is prolonged highly if you are emptying yourself during the training, and next day you're training again, or maybe it's a morning bike and then in the afternoon you have a run. It's counterproductive. It's very simple. That's proven again and again. So it's just keep fueling. And if you're anyway training for an Ironman and you are doing race pace, a good amount of your energy is coming from fat already, then you can twist it a little and like that, but training in zone 2 and like that, even zone 2 and into zone 1, we use a 5 zone, like really easy. Zone 2, Ironman, half Ironman, then threshold, and then VO2 max to make it simple. So if you're in the zone 3, 2, and 1, it's all aerobic. You have oxygen at your disposal. Everything is fine. It's just depending, as we started with, what is it you're trying to develop. If it's fitness, strength, endurance, then load up. Just keep it coming. Then you can keep it coming like, okay, some people are like, I should be gels and like that. No, it's cool. If you want to eat a cashew honey or, you bake your own rice cakes from home, I'm all for that. It's cool. It's the more clean carbs and like that, but you have to get enough energy. That's just key, to sustain the training and the recovery most of all.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I was going to ask you what things you should consume. So, but you already kind of answered that it can be what you want. Like it doesn't have to be gels always or sports drink. You can make your rice cakes and so on. So then that leaves one more question, which is what are your thoughts on specifically pre and post workout fueling? And I think in particular post workout fueling might be the most interesting one. But yeah, let me know what you think about these.
I think that pre-workout fueling is just eat your food, like just eat your breakfast and go. A lot of people swim, like if you live in towns and like that, they drive, and then because pools are situated somewhere, then you actually you swim very early and then you go to work. If you have a technical swim session, or if you have technical and to zone 2 and like distance swim and like that, up to an hour, you should be able to make it on your current state in your body and like that. But of course, there are these famous examples of like don't take energy to the pool and you don't get energy in the race and like that. It's against total, for me, it's just nonsense. It's just like, you're training, for Christ's sake, like it's a training session. You're going to work after. You have a training session in the afternoon. You're not racing, you're training. So sustain your body and give it the energy. If you have a high intensity session, let's say, I don't know, let's say you have 10 times 400 parted into like progressive 1 to 3. That's solid. Okay. And number 3 is really at maximum, like hitting 5 minutes or like that, for a good swimmer. Okay. Let's work on this one. You get into halfway and you start to feel, I can't keep it. Like if you can't keep it because it's your endurance and your muscle strength, that's fine. Then you just taper it down and then give the times or the rest time. So you work on that, But if I'm on deck and seeing that somebody that I know have the capacity, they start to struggle, then I'm thinking, what did you do yesterday or 2 days before even? What was your last 48 hours of training? Did you sleep well last night? That's my checkpoints. And then most of all, are you getting any energy? What did you eat? Oh, I didn't eat. I can't eat when I'm swimming. Most of us don't want to do that, because it's not comfortable when we are horizontal. But it's like, well, you're running out of carbohydrates and you're supposed to swim max. If you're swimming max, I can tell you, if you're pounding your 100 meters, 98 to 100% of your energy is sugar. It's carbohydrates. And if you're running low on carbohydrates, your energy is not sustaining the effort asked into your body. Your muscles are ready for it, but they're not getting the fuel. They're not getting the gasoline. So, that's as simple as that. And you're not getting out of the swim session what you could if you sustained into your body the energy to push your muscular and your breathing and your blood system to perform. If you're running low on energy at a session where you need energy, then you're not getting out of training what you could get out of it. It's as simple as that. So not bringing energy to the swim if you have a really hard swim, that's just idiotic, that's as simple as that. I can't say it in a milder way. Or the same on the bike. If you go out and you have 5 times 8 minutes at threshold, and halfway through you start to have, I didn't eat enough, I'm running out of energy. Okay, well, just alter your power, because at threshold you are burning 100% carbohydrates. You're not using fat at threshold. It's the definition, for Christ's sake. At threshold, it's a 100% fuel injection of sugar, of carbohydrates, turned into glucose, into ATP, whatever the process is. It's sugar. It's not fat. You're not using fat at threshold, period. It's 100%. You just look the numbers in the test, and that's how it is. And some people, they actually think that there's something wrong with them. It's not. You run out, the sugar level in your body starts to run down. You cannot do 5 times 8 threshold. You're going to lose the last 2. And then you miss the training stimulus of your muscular and your breathing and your blood system of the threshold. But because you didn't fuel right, not because your body couldn't. Your body might be able to do it, but you can't.
Yeah, no, those are all great tips. I would say regarding the swimming and eating before or not, this is just my personal experience, but I actually find that it's worth it to just wake up a little bit earlier and take my time to have a good breakfast before the swim, because I even feel that I just have time to wake up properly, and I don't like to head to the pool and feel like I'm still asleep. So having that, I realize that for some people, if you swim even earlier, then it might really be a different thing. But when swimming at 6:15, for example, I have no problem getting up at 5, having breakfast and getting a good time to really wake up. And so in terms of comfort, in GI discomfort or discomfort, I think that's something that for most people is trainable. Like I just learned to be able to tolerate that breakfast, even a reasonably normally sized breakfast before swimming, and it's no problem at all these days anymore.
It's a good way. It's like, okay, I want to eat before. Okay, then get up before, and then I might feel a little bit when I'm swimming, but when it comes, I tell from my head, I just say, forget it, I'm fine. Let's go. I knew this would maybe give a little bit the feeling of a full stomach when I'm swimming, but I'm fine. Let's go. My point is just that there are some rhythms and like that where we easily make the mistake. And the mistake when people get into the car and they have sent the kids down to the school, they drop them off, and then they're driving, and then they're like, I'm going to the pool now. And then they are like, okay. So then I pull out this energy bar as I'm sitting in the car. But then you eat it, and then there's at least 20 minutes before you jump into the water. That's not productive either. You have to wait, just get in the pool, start to swim, and then have a gel or energy in your drink or like that. And because some people are saying that, no, it shouldn't do that. Well, what's the functional thing of that? It's not functional. It's just not. And it's not functional because that's how the body works. It's not my opinion. It's how it's defined that the body works like this. You want to swim really, really hard, you are using 100% sugar at threshold. On run, it's the same. I like that. So, you for sure don't want it like half an hour before you hit the swimming pool area, if that's how long you have to the pool before you get in. If you're sitting and drinking a Coca-Cola because you think, now I'm getting the sugar I need. No, that's the huge mistake you can do, because the body is just going to throw a lot of things around in your body as you're sitting driving the car. For instance, insulin in huge amount. Now, when you jump in the pool, you have an unbalance in your hormones that's not going to aid you. You want to get to the pool either having a little bit of good breakfast like you, or you want to bring energy if you have a hard swim session. As I said, if it's a hard swim session, sustain your body. If it's a hard bike session, sustain your body with energy, especially hard intensity. That's sugar. You're using sugar to move fast and hard. So there's no discussion on that one. Not for me anyway.
Yeah, no, I think it's people easily do the mistake with swimming in particular because there's not the same culture of fueling in swimming, but I would say, or actually there's perceived to not be the same culture, but that's because swimmers traditionally, they have sports drink in their water bottle because it's just more practical on the pool deck than to have a bunch of gels. So we can think that, they only have water, but they're actually having sports drink. But on the bike, we know that the people are using gels and stuff because it's practical on the bike. So it's easy to believe that, but nobody ever has any energy when they are swimming, but actually they do. It's just that we don't necessarily see it because it's sports drink in their bottle.
Yeah, absolutely. There are many stories coming out of the world of cycling now with riders who have, like some of them, they say, like I saw the Danish rider Jakob Fuglsang coming out in media and saying, I wasted 8 years of my career. And why? Yeah. Because he didn't eat enough. Simply, he did not eat enough to sustain the hard training. It's that simple. And when he started doing that, he had probably the 2 best seasons of his career. And some people are like, nah, it's cycling. And I'm saying, no, guys, it's because you don't know. The culture was so fixed on low fat percentage and like that, and long rides of fat burning and like that. That's good. You become really good at burning fat. But if you want to press your muscles and give them a stimulus where they grow in strength or absolute power or sprinting power or like that, when you are going at maximum power, you are burning just sugar, nothing else. And if you don't have it available in your body, then you're not pressing what you could press. It's that simple, That's not, you shouldn't be a sugar one that just, let's not go, my message is not, let's go crazy about just using a lot of sugar all the time. My message is that sometimes, some periods of the year is not the time to lose weight. Some periods of the year, for some people, it is to optimize your fat burning ability and maybe even lose some body fat and like that. But you have to be careful what times of the year that you are trying to do it. And it all goes down to start by defining what's my goal? What is my weakness towards that goal? How do I want to develop it? And how is my nutrition going to aid in that development? What do I need in my nutrition to do to aid that specific development that I need to do to reach my goal? This is the way we work about these things. So at the front of it is not nutrition. At the front of it is, what is it I want to develop? How am I going to develop it? How is nutrition going to help me with that? That's the point.
That's a great summary and a great place to wrap it up. So thank you so much, Frank, for taking the time to do this. It's much appreciated.
You are welcome, Michael. And thank you for the world's best triathlon podcast.
Next, we'll hear from Coach Val Burke, Canadian based in New Zealand, coaching, among others, Raiden Curry. She was previously on That Triathlon Show in episode 290. I'm here with Val Burke to discuss workout fueling. Val, welcome. How are you doing?
Hello. Good. Thank you very much.
Let's dive right in and start by you giving us a summary of your general thoughts and recommendations when it comes to how to fuel your workouts.
Okay. It's quite a broad question. And the first thing I'd like to say is that I've got some really good sport nutritionists who understand endurance training. And often if the athletes are high needs, I'll refer them on. But in saying that, I have done a lot myself and throughout the years, especially when there wasn't perhaps someone I could refer on at various places. So what I'd look at the moment would be what's your training duration and your intensity, because that will determine what you need to eat. Are you a new endurance athlete or have you had quite a bit of experience training? Because often newer athletes aren't as efficient and you'll get a lot hungrier and perhaps need a little bit more. And then if you're looking at training or you're also looking at race training the gut, and of course that will determine a bit of a difference as well. So starting there, training duration, if you're training over about 75 minutes, give or take, then yes, I'd recommend that you have some fuel. What you should have is, it's got to be some carbs, but the duration and the intensity will also give you a bit of flexibility. So if your intensity is quite low, you can probably get away with some mixed nutrients. So carbohydrate primarily, but you can also have a little bit of fat and protein. And there's lots of options in the commercial products that are available, and they all have the grams on them. So it's quite easy, very easy place to start. But a lot of my athletes enjoy a lot of whole foods as well. And over the years have made some of their own recipes and use in training some more whole foods, and then reverted to the commercial products and mimic their race when they're doing their race specific training, the gut.
Yeah, and as we have discussed kind of off air, that can be a great way to even just save money, save on the sport nutrition products. I actually have an athlete that has found a way to make his own gels that are really mimic sort of the texture and even flavor, to my understanding of commercial gels, but they can be made actually really, really cheaply at home. And it doesn't take more than a bit of Googling to find some recipes for that as well. So, but as you say, whole foods is another option. I've had some other interviews on this topic, and people have mentioned things like rice cakes and bananas would be an obvious choice and so on. Do you have any other kind of options when it comes to sort of what to consume? Any specific tips there?
Well, again, a lot of the commercial products are really good. So they're out there. Some of my favorites are making bliss balls. And again, there's lots of recipes out there, but perhaps using dates, fruit, almond meal, if you want to go there, a little bit of coconut oil. They're always good ones. Bananas are always good. And quite a few of my athletes, especially if they've come from perhaps the ultra endurance side, on their very low intensity rides, or they might have roast vegetables. So just some nice roast vegetables or boiled potatoes with a bit of salt if they want to go that holistic route.
You mentioned there that you would sometimes have beginner athletes or newer athletes eat a bit more than experienced athletes. That's quite interesting. I definitely see your point there of them getting more hungry because they're less efficient in terms of their fat metabolism. Generally, like I'll just say straight, like my experience is perhaps, or my prescription would perhaps be the opposite. That even though the more experienced athletes have very good fat metabolism, they also generally work at a much higher power and use a lot more energy in total. So that's why I would maybe have them eat more than the less experienced athletes. But I'll just let you sort of go deeper into that, the ability level and how it might impact how you prescribe fueling, because I did find that very interesting, the take that you have on that.
This has come back based on feedback I've had, in that a lot of the athletes that are new to the sport find that they're hungry all the time. And when their energies gets low, they do find they seem to what we call bonk a little bit quicker than some of the more experienced athletes. And I'm sure a lot of it has to do with pacing, how hard they perceive that they need to work. But I do believe a lot of it is down to efficiency. So I'll basically follow, we have some guidelines, but I'll follow their lead. But this is just something that I've noticed. And those athletes that have had more years of endurance behind them, they can, on their easier training, longer duration, slower training, they can get by with less and not seem to notice the effects as much.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go into some amounts. So in terms of grams per hour of carbohydrate, let's start with the low intensity side of things. If you have something longer, it might be a 1.5 hour workout or a 3 hour workout or whatever it is. What would your sort of range of a recommendation be for how much to consume there?
Again, a lot of, if we start with the lower end, often the lower end could be, I've gone as low as about 0.5 gram of carb per kilo body weight. So let's say that's a 70 kg person. That would be about 35 grams of carbs an hour if someone wanted to be on the lower side for their longer, easier rides. However, we go up 60 grams is often just a common recommendation as well if they're going to be work fairly hard and want to keep up that intensity throughout the whole training session. So that's quite a wide wide window really. But if we went 30 to 60, but if you're on the 30 gram of carb side, you might end up having a bit more mixed fuel. So that might be where you have a bit more protein and fat within that because the intensity is a little bit lower. And if you're going up to the higher grams. Usually that would allow you to sustain a higher pace for longer. And if you were, going a little bit harder, you probably find you wouldn't digest the mixed foods quite as well anyways.
Yeah. And what about when you have something more intense? It might not be the longest session, but let's say you have an hour and a half or so, and you have some quite a bit of intensity to that. What would your recommendation be there for the amount to consume?
Yeah. So again, if we look at 60 being a good bottom place to start, 60 grams of carbs an hour, and that, if we started there, and then if we also looked at perhaps looking at race prep or training the gut, then you'd want to be mimicking what you did in race day. And often I'll do say one a month or every few weeks in the months leading up to the race, where people just mimic their race nutrition. And that would start at about 60 grams. But again, as you know, that often we're going up even higher than that if people can stomach it and their digestive system allows it.
Yeah. With the intense workouts, is there a point where you would, so you mentioned there's 75 minutes as a sort of rough guideline for when you should consider starting to fuel, or like the duration of workout that you would need to fuel. What's your take on really intense workouts that are maybe shorter than that, maybe just an hour, but a lot of really hard work? Would you recommend fueling that a little bit, or is it not necessary because it's a relatively short workout?
I mean, technically, if you're well fueled going into it, and it depends how many sets and reps and how much time you're doing. But if we really look at someone who's going really hard, say threshold VO2 max intensity, technically you could use up your glycogen stores within about 20 minutes. So if you look at that, yes, you could fuel throughout the hour. Whereas if you're doing, say, 3 sets of 7 minutes at threshold, then perhaps in that hour session, you might get away without, or you might get away with maybe 30 or 45 grams and maybe start in at about 30 minutes. Again, it really depends if you're talking about an hour of intense training, or if that includes the 30-minute warm-up and then you're into about 30 minutes of intensity. But yes, with the intensity, they definitely need more, and it really depends on how long the high intensity sets are going to be. And sometimes I do go race nutrition for those, just so that people can practice it and see if their digestive system allows it.
Yeah. So you mentioned there's 75 minutes for at least for the easier workouts as a benchmark. Other than that, are there situations when you would not fuel workouts? So when you would perhaps deliberately say that, okay, this is a workout that you should do without fuel, and sort of test how well you can go without it, or situations like that?
Yeah. So I've had the fasted training or the low glycogen training or training low. They've all been trends in the last, I don't know how many years we're looking at, with single discipline sports, and triathlon has started. I suppose they've been using it as well. So I have used it with athletes, and I've had athletes, to be honest, that have gone for 3 hours trying not to eat. But what we see is that with the fasted training, what we see, I see a lot of overall problems with that. So I'm not a huge fan of it. But the theory is that most triathletes are somewhat partially fasted anyways, if you're training 2 or even 3 times a day. Let's say you're an age group where you're probably hitting 2 sessions a day and maybe working in between. So you might be primarily fasted. So I tend not to put them in unless an athlete really wants to try it. And if they do want to try it, it might be, for example, two days a week, might be perhaps one of their swims. They wake up and go swim on virtually nothing. Then they consume after and go about their day. Or it might be a run or a bike where they, again, just wake up. So they're probably partially fasted anyways. And then an hour and a half to 2 hours would be the longest I'd ever prescribe. And it would be a low intensity ride. But like I say, I do it more if the athlete wants it. And I've had many athletes that have wanted it. But interestingly, most of them have tried it and they're now back into good fueling because they found that's worked better for them.
Got it. Yeah. What's your take on fueling being especially for athletes that are training at a fairly significant volume. We don't have to talk necessarily about pros, but age groupers that are training on the upper end of the typical volumes that you see for age groupers. What's your take on fueling being important there for just not necessarily for the workout you're in or the day you're in, but just overall, like managing your glycogen levels over the weeks and months of training and trying to avoid a state where you are just constantly depleted anyway. Is that something that you consider?
Definitely. I go around athletes' preferences, but often if I was to start, what I'd have athletes do is fill out a training log, and I'd have a slot every 3 hours, and I'd like to see something every 3 hours. Whether you decide that you're going into 6 small meals, whether you do breakfast, lunch, dinner, and then snacks in between, we don't like to see gaps of longer than about 3 hours, and that's everyone, pro or age groupers, simply because what happens is your body can often get into a energy deficient state, which maybe in one season that might be okay, but I have seen a lot of athletes run into troubles long term by being in that energy depleted state. So I do, eating throughout the day is important. Having a snack, especially if you're doing early morning workouts and say you're doing 2 workouts a day, many days of the week, is having a late night snack before you go to bed, and usually a little bit of carb, but protein. That seems to be where we get the best protein synthesis, is when we're sleeping. And then the other key, very, very key time is that 30 minutes after your training. And that seems to affect a lot of health indices. If you miss that 30 minutes after training, often you find that you're a bit lethargic the next day. Your glycogen stores perhaps haven't had that instant refueling. But also, there's also, even if we're looking at sort of blood variables and hormonal effects, that 30-minute window seems very, very important for performance, but also health. So if that's the one thing you're going to pay very particular attention to, is make sure you have that snack within the 30 minutes after training.
Can you give some examples of what a good post-workout snack in that 30-minute window would be?
Yeah, so there's lots of commercial products. It's researched quite well, but there's also a lot of whole foods that you can use yourself. So the smoothies, they've been around for quite a while, and milk is actually very, very good for providing the protein, some carbohydrate, and 2 different types of protein. So if you can tolerate lactose, adding milk to your smoothie, fruit to your smoothie, perhaps some berries for antioxidants, and then some banana for just carbohydrate. Greek yogurt is meant to be very good, Greek yogurt as opposed to other yogurts. And then if you add oats, nuts, fruit, seeds to it, you're getting a lot of the fats and proteins as well. And the other one, my daughter, who's taken nutrition and is a collegiate runner as well, she makes a mug cake, which is basically just banana, peanut butter, cocoa, and milk. And that's often her post-recovery snack. And no flour, but it just gives you protein and carbs as well.
Yeah, that sounds nice. Might want to give that one a try. And coming back to what you mentioned there with protein before bed, which, I do think it's something that, of course, in the resistance training world, people are like really religious with that sort of thing, and they are actually really good when it comes to knowing what to do for nutrition and having it be a really critical part of their training. And to some extent, I think that us endurance athletes maybe should take a leaf out of their book when it comes to just how critical they see it. But my question there is, what do you see as good sort of pre-bed protein snacks? Would you go for something like Greek yogurt, or perhaps something or like a casein or something like that? I think that's what the sports nutrition companies would want you to have, like a slow release protein. What's your take on that?
Yes, and I'm sure there's a market, and there will be some well-researched information out there if you want to purchase something. But again, the Greek yogurt seems to go quite well. Milk, a glass of milk seems to go. Milk has whey and casein as well in it. And let me see, a bit of peanut butter could be a little bit of a smoothie. Not too much, but it does. Endurance athletes, we've been very carb focused for a lot of years, and we have a lot of tissue turnover. So if you look at tendons and muscles and the damage you're doing with some of your training, it is important to get the protein needs up. And that last snack before bed seems to be very effective.
Yeah. That's great. And I think that's a great place to wrap up. Do you have anything, if you want to kind of give a final take-home message to the audience or summarize your message here, what would that be?
I think when you go specifically into long-distance triathlon, nutrition will make or break you. So we focus a lot on training, but I think the more we take care and have good nutrition, like good, solid, whole nutrition, I think the better you're going to sustain your training and the better your health is going to be long term. So do pay attention. I've had a lot of athletes that have said even adding the 30-minute post-recovery snack has made a difference to their iron levels and to their hormone and to how they feel. So those are really important details to probably plug into your training. So if in your diary, you plug your training in, plug 30 minutes to make yourself a good snack and recover after.
Yeah, that's good. And that's a great point. All right. Thank you so much, Val. It was great to talk to you as always. Have a good rest of your day.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
And then we have Colin Moore, who was on that triathlon show in episode 271. He's also the host of the podcast Empirical Cycling, so check that out if you don't know it. It's a very nice podcast that goes really deep into physiology and exercise science. So if you're interested in that, definitely give it a try. In this interview with Kolie, I had a bit of an audio blooper, actually a big audio blooper on my part, where I had the microphone connected to the computer, but I actually hadn't moved it to the front of my face. It was actually behind the computer, so it was far away from me, and I didn't notice it until quite a ways into the interview. So that was a funny moment, and of course, Kolie, as a podcaster in particular, enjoyed it when I suddenly started pulling the microphone towards me, noticing that it was far away. But we'll see what we can do. Not me, somebody who actually knows what they're doing, Carrie in post-production. But hopefully it's not too bad in that first half or whatever it is of the interview, and you can still hear me okay. But that's the explanation for why the audio might be a little bit iffy on my part through part of the interview. So enjoy. Welcome back to That Triathlon Show, Kolie. How are you doing?
Great. How are you doing, Michael?
I'm doing great as well. Enjoying another month of summer here in Portugal, I hope. We're recording early September, so the weather is still really nice and lovely for cycling and training. Let's just dive right into the topic here with workout fueling. This is something that I know that you've talked about a bit on your podcast, and maybe in some episodes you've gone in depth, but in which case we can have that in the show notes. You can let me know after. But let's start by just a simple on paper, maybe more complicated in practice, summary of your general recommendations for how to fuel workouts for endurance athletes.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it, is pretty similar to what I'm sure most other people would recommend is, if you're going to go longer, you're going to go harder, you need to eat more. And if you're going shorter and you're going easier, you probably don't need to eat as much, if at all, like a 1 hour recovery ride. You don't need 100 grams an hour to fuel that. And you also probably shouldn't do 0 grams an hour to fuel a 5-hour race, let's say.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And as you say, that's what most other people would have also recommended. So can we go into a bit more detail on the amounts there and how that relates to the duration first, perhaps, and then we can talk about how it relates to intensity.
Yeah, sure. Well, with duration, I think this is actually one of the more interesting aspects of it because, the intensity aspect is pretty simple. You go really hard, you're going to burn a lot of glycogen and glucose, and that's, and you need to fuel that appropriately. But for duration, I'm always fascinated by ultras and stuff like that because, if you're going to race for, let's say, 12 hours or 24 hours or longer, the intensity is fairly low, but you're also spanning the breadth of several meals for yourself for a day. And so, the nutritional aspect becomes more than just, we need to eat more carbohydrates. It's like, how do you actually fuel the regular nutritional needs for your body on the bike or while running with these, super, super long events? And so that's one of the aspects of ultras that me and my other coaches at Empirical Cycling are always looking at, which is, nutrition is a make or break thing for ultras and like long rides. Like even if you're just going to do like an 8-hour training ride, which is super long, a lot of cyclists will, skip things like proteins and fats on those rides. And I actually think that that's a big mistake. You really should stop for, 20, 30 minutes and grab a proper lunch, just a sandwich or something like that.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Really, really excellent point. And let's go back to intensity, actually, because you said that that's pretty simple. You will burn a lot of glycogen, so you should fuel that properly. Does that mean basically that even if it's a shortish workout, let's call it an hour 15, an hour 30, but you have a lot of intensity in it, would you recommend going towards 90 grams per hour of carbohydrate or so for that type of workout?
Yeah, well, for something like an hour, that's actually a very interesting case because, if you consume a good amount of carbohydrates beforehand, you're actually going to be pretty well topped up. And especially for a super intense hour and a half long ride, a lot of people can't eat during that kind of ride. Your guts just won't accept the food. And so, sipping on, some kind of electrolyte drink with some sugar in it, or even something like Scratch Super Fuel, that can surely be beneficial. But when it comes to fueling something really, really short and hard, I would say, fueling beforehand with a lot of carbohydrates, within the 2 or 3 hours beforehand, maybe a gel or something when you start, that can be good. And then once we get out to the 2-3 hour duration, you're going to have some rests in there, and you're going to need to, if it's like a hard tempo ride, like a fartlek tempo, you're going hard up hills and easy on descents, and you're pretty well putting in the work. You're going to need to eat during that kind of ride. I would recommend, depending on the power you're putting out, at least 50 or 60 grams of carbohydrates an hour, and then if your FTP is pretty high and you're putting out a lot of kilojoules, you're probably going to want to eat even more than that.
Yeah, and duration, going back to that a little bit, let's say we're doing an endurance ride or even an endurance run. Well, let's stick to the endurance ride because we have a better sort of a larger spectrum of durations there. But if we keep it away from the real extremes of training for ultras, let's say we're keeping it within typical sort of Ironman training days, which might be anywhere from a 2-hour ride to or an hour and a half as a sort of fairly short endurance ride to, let's say, 5 or 6 hours. How will the duration impact in that spectrum, and then how much would you recommend for those different types of endurance rides?
Yeah, I think duration actually is it has certainly a big impact on what and how much you should eat. So for a typical 2 to 5 hour ride, I would usually recommend something like, if your FTP is in the 200 to 300 watt range, I would probably say 40 to 50 grams of carbs an hour. But once you get up into the mid 300s to the low 400s for FTP range, and you're doing endurance workouts, I find a lot of people actually need to eat still like 70 to 80, maybe 90 grams an hour. And I've worked with a couple athletes who have very high FTPs, but actually don't have very good base training, let's say. And their endurance is actually not that good. And so they actually really need to fuel these low intensity endurance workouts with 100 grams of carbs an hour in order to, be ready for the next day. Because as I'm sure other people on this episode are going to say, fueling for the workout that you're doing now is actually, it's recovering for the next workout that you're doing. Because, your body's a good energy accountant. And when you spend a lot of kilojoules on a ride, let's say your average power for an endurance ride is somewhere between 250 and 300 watts. That is a ton of kilojoules, and your body is burning those, and it's going to, it's going to balance the ledger books in such a way that, you're going to be pretty hungry at some point. And, eating during that ride is beneficial to, pre-fueling for your next workout, whether it's later in the day or the next day or, 2 days from then. So
playing devil's advocate here a little bit, why wouldn't you tell those athletes that might have a high FTP but not necessarily that great fat oxidation capabilities to fuel more, would it be beneficial to have them fuel less and improve that fat burning capability?
Yeah, that is actually a good question, and I see exactly where you're going with that. I thought we would get to that question a little later, but I like how you're transitioning to it. So I think, a lot of the aerobic adaptations that we make occur regardless of how we fuel. Just because you're eating carbohydrates during a long endurance ride does not necessarily mean that you're going to negate any adaptations. And in fact, if you can put out a little more power, if you can last a little longer by eating, you're actually going to get more adaptations. And when it comes to, that type of fueling, I think you're getting at, fasted rides or low carbohydrate rides. I think there is an interesting place for those. Well, actually, I actually never advocate fasted rides personally, unless it's like an hour recovery ride. That's fine. Any longer than that, any harder than that, I absolutely think that it's essential to fuel properly. Because otherwise, you're going to put yourself in a hole. And I've seen a lot of athletes do this. And even when my athletes do this against my recommendations, usually burnout happens pretty quickly, especially if they're doing something like trying to lose a lot of weight very soon.
Yeah. Let's go there and discuss the fasted rides or glycogen depleted rides in more detail. And what can you? Do you have any sort of, looking at the metabolic side, physiological side, any insight into why that is not necessary to get those aerobic adaptations, as you mentioned, or you can take it kind of where you want, that's kind of I guess it would be interesting to hear your take about the metabolism of it all.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question, because I think a lot of people, when they think about, like fat max, like at what intensity do you burn the most fat? I think that there's a belief in a lot of folks, definitely not everybody. I know that a lot of coaches are well aware of this fact, but just because you're burning a lot of fat does not necessarily mean that's going to make you better at burning more fat. You can do, like, FTP extensive work is also another type of endurance training that will get you burning more fat. It also gets you storing more glycogen, blah, blah, blah. So I think one of the things that I think people should think about is what keeps us from burning fat. And why do we want to burn more fat? Obviously, we want to burn more fat because it spares glycogen, yada, yada. But what are the things that we can do to burn more fat? And what really limits it, in my opinion anyway, is transport from fat tissues. And obviously, there is intramuscular triglycerides that we can burn, but the transport from adipose tissue is a really, really big one. And so when we want to improve that, really just all kinds of riding, like high volume or extensive FTP work, any kind of extensive work like that, that's going to be beneficial. And I would say also for something like, like I said before, I don't advocate fasted rides, but when I give people low carbohydrate rides, we'll glycogen deplete them for, starting with the previous day's ride. We'll limit the carbohydrate intake probably about 50% of what nominally would be, at advised. Maybe starting with 75% and bringing it down to 25 to 30%.
So are you referring to the in-workout fueling there, or what they would have consumed between that previous day's ride and? That would be between. So let's say you're going to do a low carbohydrate ride on Sunday. Fuel normally for your Saturday ride, including before and during, and then afterwards, you can get in a good amount of carbohydrates. But after that, I would recommend, starting to decrease the amount of carbohydrates. And then so in the morning, actually here's the trick to doing these kinds of rides properly, is you actually want to make sure that you are isocaloric. You don't want to have a caloric deficit when doing these kinds of rides, because like I said before, the body is a good energy accountant. And if you are in any kind of severe energy deficit, your adipose tissue is an endocrine or organ in a way, because it's going to send out signals like, hey, we're empty, you better eat. And this can also lead to, other problems down the road if, typically seen when endurance athletes just aren't eating enough in general, overtraining and chronic fatigue, all sorts of stuff. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I see you were gonna. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. So yeah. What I was going to ask is, and for what athletes would you do this? And then if you do this sort of ride, how often would you do it? How long would you do it for in terms of like a block of training? How many times per week for how many weeks and those sorts of things?
I would say once or twice a week, max, absolute max. Because one of the things that we're doing when we do these rides is, we are teaching the body to rely and move and transport fatty acids better, and especially across membranes. Like one of the things that seems to be really critical in fat transport into the mitochondria is the the CPT1, CPT2, and carnitine shuttle. And by doing these kinds of rides, what I've seen is that TTE at FTP, so how long you can hold your FTP. So when it comes to the mechanism of adaptation that I think happens is when we do these kinds of rides for, let's say, a month or two, usually what happens is I see TTE at FTP go out. And this is an indicator of increasing fat reliance. And I think it's because of, increased carnitine stores and transport and CPT1 and, the whole chain. Actually, on the Empirical Cycling podcast, the series I've been doing lately is about metabolism. So we've been looking at, how we break down glucose, how we break down fatty acids, what limits the fatty acid transport, at least in my opinion. I go into it in depth there. And, next couple episodes, we're actually going to get into some of the other mechanisms. We're going to talk about, should you do keto diets? The answer is no. We're going to talk about VLA max. We're going to talk about all sorts of stuff. So that's coming up in the next couple episodes. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's I've been following that and looking forward to the next episodes as well. The other question was would be what types of athletes would you do these rides for, and when you do that, for how many weeks would you keep doing it? Like, let's say of your athletes, do you have 10% of your athletes do it, or is it 80% of your athletes? Like, how prevalent is it for you to do this intervention with these types of rides?
It's not as common as it used to be with me, because one of the things that I found with most average folks is that fueling low carbohydrate kind of stuff is difficult while maintaining an isocaloric diet. Where do you get the calories is, can be a problem. So some people will underfuel, so that's a problem. Some people are just generally kind of groggy, in which case, we'll increase the carbohydrates till they get used to it. But, a lot of them just don't like it. But for those that where it works, usually we'll do it early season. We'll probably do it for a month or two. Excuse me. And I would say we do it with most endurance athletes. Pretty much anybody who wants to increase FTP, increasing TTE is actually a really, really good first step. And then we'll do some VO2 max work, and then we'll see a big bump of FTP on the back of that.
All right. And coming back to those workouts where you do fuel, do you have any other recommendations? You mentioned already for those really long rides, making sure you also get some protein and fat to just kind of compensate for your lack of having your normal meals. But for rides and training in the more normal sort of time ranges, do you have any recommendations for what to consume in terms of, do you prefer to rely on like sports drinks and gels or sports nutrition products, or more natural foods like bananas, or any recommendations on that front?
Actually, that's a very good question, because, well, just in general, I think that whatever somebody likes to eat is what they should eat. And once the food consumption or type of food becomes an issue, then we'll look at something else. So it's, an individualized thing, because, somebody might like to eat Cheez-Its, and somebody else might like to eat Swedish fish, and somebody else might like to eat eggs. And so, it's whatever you got is fine until it becomes an issue. Then we look at what else to do. But also, I think this is an interesting question, because for the glycogen depleted rides, I usually recommend people consume carbohydrates during those rides. Because one of the things that is going to happen is you're still going to be consuming, or you're still going to be utilizing some carbohydrates. And when you start with depleted glycogen stores, you are on the edge of bonking for the whole ride. And it's really beneficial to avoid that. And so, starting with glycogen depletion and consuming carbohydrates does not necessarily mean that you're going to get less adaptation. It's one of those things where it's kind of it's a strong spice in the recipe, as it were.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you mentioned as well some thoughts on pre-workout fueling with the intense rides, fueling with plenty of carbohydrates 2 to 3 hours before. What about post-workout fueling? Any thoughts around that?
Yeah, actually, I think that's a very interesting question because, I think a lot of high-intensity stuff uses a lot more glycogen than most people think. Because when we look at the metabolic demands of high intensity, let's say, we're doing 30-second all-out sprints or something like that, some really high intensity intervals. If we look at the kilojoules spent, it's a pretty low kilojoule ride. But when we look at the metabolic demands, if we let's look at the difference between aerobically oxidized carbohydrate versus anaerobically oxidized carbohydrates. So at FTP and below, if let's say at FTP, we're at 100% carbohydrates, which doesn't, it's usually not the case, but let's just say, we're going to get, 4-ish ATP per molecule of glucose oxidized, but high intensity, we get 2 ATP. And so if we need to fuel, X kilojoules of work with, 2 ATP per molecule of glucose, we can see the demand for glucose is much, much higher if we need to supply the same amount of ATP. And so this means that we are obligately churning through glucose like a Gatling gun.
Yeah, totally. So what does that, what are the implications of that in the post-workout fueling?
Yeah, the implications is that you probably want to increase the amount of carbohydrates greatly to something like maybe 7 to 10 grams per kilogram body weight for at least an hour or two, if not more. And that's something that actually I recommend that working with a dedicated nutritionist or a dietitian is really beneficial for most athletes, because somebody like me, like I'm, as a coach, I feel like I'm like a mechanic. I can, kind of imagine what's going on in the muscles and adaptation and yada, yada. And I'll say, this is what we need to do to get you faster. But when it comes to fueling and nutrition and stuff like that, I actually have all my workout, I actually have all of my athletes work with a dedicated nutritionist named Rita Brooke, who's excellent. And, because that actually takes some of the burden off of me, because I'm actually not as much of an expert on these kinds of things as she is. So, I can't, give people, you need to eat this many calories today to, lose weight or whatever it is, and she's great at that kind of stuff. So it actually, takes some of the burden off of me, and also it gives the athlete another person to bounce ideas off of. And having a good working relationship between me and her actually is really, really beneficial to our athletes.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And what about if you're doing a long endurance ride, let's say a 45-hour ride? What would your recommendations be different then in terms of the post-workout fueling?
Yeah, because generally I would say, because this is where the kilojoules that you burn are actually going to be fairly well reflective of the general needs. And so once you look at the kilojoules burned plus your, basal metabolic rate, you can actually come up with a pretty good number to fuel yourself properly and maintain body weight and muscle mass and whatever else you need to do.
Yeah. What about protein post-workout? Is that something you think is important?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm sure a lot of other people on this episode are going to say just what I'm going to say, which is you need to keep your protein intake at, pretty steady through the day, because, if we look at, protein synthesis rate versus protein breakdown rate, we need to, if you want to maintain your muscle mass, then that's something that you need to do, is make sure that you're always getting in, 20, 30, 40, however much grams of protein. Somebody who, sprinter like me, I need about 200 grams of protein a day. A small climber might need 100 grams of protein a day, and that would be spread throughout the meals. So you absolutely need to make sure that you're getting it in every so often.
Right. Is there anything else regarding workout fueling that you want to mention, Kolie? Anything that we missed?
Actually, I think we covered it all. Unless there's anything else that you thought was interesting in there that we didn't quite go down.
I mean, I think there's a lot of things we could go down, but I think this is a perfect summary of recommendations, and this is I think that probably if we want to really go down deep into rabbit hole, then I would direct the listeners to your metabolism series, and they can hear more about the kind of the nitty-gritty details at a cellular level over there, and we can keep this one a bit shorter and just keep to the sort of practical recommendations. So I think that's this was a perfect summary of that. So thank you.
Okay, great. Yeah. Come listen to the Empirical Cycling podcast.
And the next interview is with coach Ryan Bolton, who coaches athletes such as Ben Hoffman and Sam Long. Ryan was on the podcast in episode 221. And I'm here with Ryan Bolton to discuss workout fueling. Ryan, welcome. Hope you're doing well.
Yeah, thanks. Great to be here.
It's my pleasure to have you. First, let's just start by a general summary of your recommendations for workout fueling, and then we can dig into some details from there.
Yeah, totally. We could dive into this super deeply. So we'll probably get into more specifics here in a little bit. But I would say my general philosophy on diets and on fueling is somewhat traditional and not very fatty. I know there's a lot, and not fatty, as in it's a fad to be currently eating this type of food. I'm somewhat traditional in that way. I would say one of the biggest principles that I follow with fueling for workouts is actually following a periodized plan, just like you would with a training plan, where there's an actual base period, and then you add, intensity and more race specific stuff as you get closer to races. And I do a similar thing with my athletes in regard to fueling for workouts as well.
Can you go into that a little bit deeper? How do you periodize it?
Yeah, for sure. So, during base phases, working on, because intensity is significantly lower, and, there's a lot more, if you want to characterize zones or put it into zones, there's a lot more zone 1 and zone 2 work. The need for sugar in the body is actually less, we use sugar, as a fuel source, more prevalently when intensity is higher. So during base sessions, you actually shouldn't be utilizing that much sugar. In fact, a lot of athletes, especially age group athletes, like I feel like not allowing them to take very much sugar in during their base type training, it actually trains them to keep the intensity a little bit lower, because, they want to go fast or something. And it's, not a time of the season to be going fast. And so during base type season, like I said, more calorically restrictive, definitely fueling less calories during workouts. I would say doing long or not adding fueling to workouts for a longer period of time. Because once again, you don't need it. Really working on fat metabolism, really working on utilizing fat metabolism and training that system. If you look at what getting fit is ultimately just becoming more efficient at burning fat at higher levels of intensity. So, if you can train that during the base season, then as you get into the higher intensity stuff, as you get closer to races and stuff, start gradually adding fueling in. And fueling, when I talk about fueling, like I'm talking primarily, sugars and or complex sugars, and we can go into that here a little bit more when we get into specifics. But and more starting to get the stomach used to what you're going to do, both in reality in the race, but also it's absolutely necessary, because when you start adding, intensity, and particularly to long workouts, you need that sugar. You need that sugar to finish the workouts, to have successful workouts, and to finish them, with high quality. And to me, that's incredibly, incredibly important. Sugar, like I said, I'm a big believer in working on getting your body to be non-reliant on sugar, but I'm also a huge believer in that sugar is an amazing fuel source. And when you're going hard, it's an amazing thing. You want to create a body that's as efficient to go as fast as possible without sugar. But when you do need sugar, it's absolutely critical. And adding it, it allows for that high quality top end stuff to happen and to work. There's a delicate balance, of course, as we all know. You can't just you can't blast it, and also people have sensitive stomachs, and you can only consume X amount of calories per hour in a workout and or in racing. But like finding that balance is key, and like I said, and then adding that in as you get into that high specificity stuff is important.
Let's take a couple of examples of that. So in the early phase, in the base training phase of training, what might typical age group athletes Saturday ride look like in terms of duration, and then the fueling prescription or recommendations for that workout? And then in contrast, as they're building up for their, let's say, a long or half or full Ironman race a few weeks out from that, when they're doing really specific stuff with some race pace and still long duration, probably, how different is it then?
Yeah, I would say it's quite a bit different, because what normally I would like to do is, as you build, and this is kind of the whole periodization component of it, is as you build the volume, the body should become adaptive as well. So I think a lot of people would know just from personal experience, if you haven't been training and you go for a 2-hour bike ride, even an aerobic 2-hour bike ride, and with no fuel, you get to the end of it and you're pretty darn hungry and you're ready to fuel. However, with a little bit more fitness, you can go 3 hours. With a little bit more fitness, you can go 4 hours. With a little bit more fitness, you can go 5 hours without fueling, as long as you're keeping, your zones in check. So I would say minimal to no fueling in the base season until you absolutely, need it and you need your body. The other thing that can be different about fueling in the base season is the type of fuel. And you don't need to be eating, let's say you're going on a 5-hour bike ride and you need to take some calories in. You don't need to be taking in, say like a pure sugar, a pure gel or something like that. Like, honestly, you can have, like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich or something that's more substantive and maybe something that has more protein in it. That's like a pretty common thing. As you get into the more specific, training, like you said, let's say 4 weeks, 5 weeks out from the race, I like to move athletes into exact race nutrition strategy, so that we're eating the exact type of things that they're going to eat during the race, and in exactly the same load that they're going to eat during the race. And man, it varies a lot, from athlete to athlete, depending upon their metabolism, their stomach, how big they are. You see, I guess I can tell you the ranges that I see in Ironman is, I would say, people taking in anywhere from 250 calories an hour to, I know some athletes who are taking in 500 to 600 calories an hour, which is actually, it's really on the high end. But more recently, I've seen
in terms of grams per hour of carbohydrate, that would be 250 would be around 60 grams per hour, and
that's right.
500 to 600 would be 125 to 150 grams per hour. So that is really high.
Yeah, that's high. Yeah, and those are the higher end athletes that are pushing kind of the limits. In Ironman, when you look at like what intensities are you racing at, and I think this is it's kind of a little side note here, is you often hear, oh man, I was having a really great race until my gut shut down. And I always say, well, you probably weren't having a great race. It probably means you were in over your head and you were going too hard, because if your gut's shutting down in an Ironman, you were probably at too high of an intensity. And, but when you look at what an age group athlete, what percentages of max or what percentages of threshold, they're racing at, it's a little bit lower than normally what, say, the pros are pushing. And so I see the caloric intakes of professionals normally actually being higher. They may be more efficient, but their intensity is also a little bit higher. So they sometimes have to tap into a bit more sugar stores.
Yeah, definitely. So higher relative intensity would mean higher carbohydrate requirements. Also, the higher absolute power would just lead to that.
Exactly.
What about, do you gradually build up through the season? So let's say we're not quite there in the specific period yet, but you are already at a phase in your training where you're doing some general intensity work and so on. What would the recommendations be for a ride like that, which might be several months out still from your A race or so, but it's no longer just a base endurance workout?
Totally. So, and I kind of have some rules of thumb for that, and that at that phase, because this is like the phase that we're talking about where you probably can't get through the workout without taking in calories, without sacrificing the quality of the workout. And I think, like, as an athlete or as a coach, that's the point where you need to be like, okay, we need to incorporate, fueling into the workout. I say that, like, as a rule of thumb personally, like if athletes like start asking when you're getting into that phase, I say, if you're doing runs that have intensity in them and that are over an hour and 30 minutes, you need to start starting a fueling program. And we can talk about that in a moment. And then if in bikes, I always say if it's over 3 hours, if you're doing over 3 hour rides that have intensity in them, then you need to start doing a fueling program. And a fueling program, it goes like right away. It's not like, oh, okay, well, like with what I just said, you start fueling at an hour 30 on the run. No, you start treating the run like it is, because you want to start getting the fueling right away. So you actually start, dosing your fueling early on, like, as early as 20 minutes on. And also, you can be eating ahead of time too, just to make sure. Because to me, it's important that the athletes have the fuel to get through, like, let's say the 2 hour mark of the run, and to be still getting quality at that point and not losing the quality because they are just completely out of fuel. That's, one of the main reasons to do it. The other huge reason to do it is to, once again, get race fueling nutrition nailed down. And sometimes that takes a lot of time. I mean, that's the funky thing about race fueling is, and I'm sure you've seen this before too, is people, they'll nail it with one Ironman. They'll completely nail their nutrition, and they're like, that's it. Let's mark it in the books, and this is what we're going to stick with. And then, 4 months later, they'll do another Ironman. They'll follow exactly the same program, and they'll have stomach issues. And that's the tricky thing with it. It's pretty dynamic. And I think with all of this, and that's kind of a lesson. So, we talk about these specific timelines and these specific calories and stuff. I think it's very important for athletes to learn the indicators in their body, the feelings, the sensations of, hey, I feel like I might be a little overcaloried right now. My stomach's a little bit off. What do I do in this point? How do I back off? How long do I back off? And it's so athlete dependent, and it's such an art form to understand that, and or vice versa. I think that I'm under caloried right now. What do I need to do to take in new calories? I think, that this is a whole other podcast topic, but talking about, the glucose monitors, the actual in-time glucose monitors and stuff, because I think they're incredibly valuable this way. To this point, it has been very, this like, just by feel like situation, am I on top calories? I think that I'm shooting for this. These are the type of calories that have worked in the past. And, this is how I feel right now. Whereas with those and having that data, you can actually get like, no, I actually am low on sugar right now, and I actually do need to consume something, or I don't, because I'm plenty high on sugar right now. So I think that's interesting. I mean, you're just talking about blood sugar, like absolute blood sugar at that point, which doesn't like necessarily reflect your stores or anything, but still those things could be valuable. And I think will become more and more prevalent out on the race course.
Yes. I was looking at the WTCS races this weekend, and Christian Blumenfeld was sporting one of those monitors. Even just this weekend, we had the Portuguese half distance national championships, and I saw one of the athletes there wearing one, and that's not a professional athlete we're talking about. So they are becoming prevalent.
I saw a statement from one of the companies that's making them, and when the Tour de France banned them, the Tour de France says you can't wear them during the race, and they said this shows you that these things are useful and powerful. If they're not letting us use it, it means that we're getting really good, that the athletes are maybe getting a little bit too much information. And I think, but, I think that's one great thing about triathlon as a sport is our sport's almost the opposite is, triathlon is so into innovation and so into this type of stuff that I think we are the type of sport that embraces, this type of technology. Cycling's kind of old school and they kind of, poo-poo these ideas, whereas triathlon almost embraces them, which triathlon obviously has. I mean, they're major sponsors of races now.
Yeah. It's actually a podcast episode that I'm just looking for some good people to talk about it. I am quite interested in what you said there. Yeah, they measure the blood sugar, but how does it help us if the muscles are using the muscle glycogen? And I don't know
for
the
sure.
Answer.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I don't know if anyone really knows that answer. I mean, and I don't know how to ultimately, how do you measure muscle glycogen levels, like you said, storage levels, how can you do that in an acute manner, what these blood glucose monitors are doing. So, yeah.
Well, let's get back to the workout fueling. And one thing that you mentioned there that is in the base training phase, for example, it doesn't have to be sports nutrition products. It can be something different, some whole foods. Discuss a little bit more around what should you consume and when. What are some good options, and you can discuss both sort of those alternative options for the base training phase. But then when it comes to the sort of more specific preparation, what you said already that you want the athletes to be practicing their race nutrition plan. So I guess it then depends on what their nutrition plan is. But if you have any additional recommendations around that, then feel free to let us know that.
Yeah, during the base phase, like I said, you can use alternative fueling sources. I mean, like you said, honestly, like a ham sandwich. In fact, this was actually the first year that I did an Ironman. I was out with a very experienced Ironman athlete, and we were probably out in the middle of a 6-hour ride, and we stopped at, some trashy gas station in the middle of nowhere. And he bought a ham sandwich, and this is like those, convenience store ham sandwiches, which are probably really bad for you. And I was like, man, what are you thinking? And he was like, he said, dude, at hour 5, you're going to be like blown away at like how good I feel, because he was basically just getting in calories. You know what I mean? He didn't need the sugar calories. You don't need the pure sugar calories. You could afford to take in more longer term, calories, like, whatever, a complex carbohydrate, like a slower acting, even protein, there was fat in that, so during the base season, you can get away with that more if you are taking in calories. In fact, during the base season, I would avoid like your gels and like straight up, sugars and everything. You just don't need that type of stuff. Some people choose, and it is actually okay if you can build up to it, just to be completely fasted in those longer workouts and not take in anything, as long as, once again, you're not bonking and coming home. The value, and this is like kind of an interesting thing to look at, is the value of eating on those long rides and eating more, like I said, protein rich foods, not the, pure sugar stuff, is it could possibly, and this is what I like about eating on these in the base season, if you are going to eat, and if you're not eating immediately after working out, I think that's an important thing to point out, but is the recovery potential. What I think happens is, a person will, let's say they do a 5-hour fasted ride in the base season. They need to, if you do that, it's important when you get home to eat something, like get something in your system right away. For recovery and everything. And I mean, that's like debatable. Okay, well, how long do I do that? How many calories are going to be, and how long do I want to stay in this fasted state and all that type of stuff? But I think that's important, because if you do that cumulatively, day after day after day, fasting, not eating recovery food, then you're just going to dig yourself into a hole. So there is this balance here of, making sure that you are getting in calories. I think the big takeaway maybe for listeners and everything that actually I try to avoid during the base season with my athletes is just the pure sugar stuff. You don't need that. It's not necessary.
And you already talked about the post-workout or led into the post-workout recovery. And I was going to ask about that next. You kind of already answered all of the questions that I have, like when should you take it and how much should you take? And I guess it depends on how much you fuel the ride and so on. But do you have anything additional to add on that post-workout fueling?
Well, I mean, making sure that you have, with post-workout fueling, protein should definitely be a significantly larger part of the equation. And it is. But you also need once again, in post-workout fueling, you need to make sure that you have pure sugar. I always tell people a great post-workout, food is like, making a smoothie, some type of a smoothie with like a juice or even adding, like I said, honey or like pure glucose sugar to it with protein powder. For example, I think they say the optimal ratio is a 4-to-1 ratio, which is also kind of the cliched chocolate milk thing. Because if you look at what the consistency of chocolate milk is, it's basically that optimal recovery fuel, based on science and everything. And, you can recreate that with so many things, and all of that. So that's what with recovery, that recovery fuel, once again, as you get into the higher intensity phases, is more important than ever, particularly for triathletes, if you're doing more than one workout a day and consecutive days of hard workouts. It's not as important for athletes who are one a day, doing one workout a day and or not consecutive days worth of like hard workouts. It's not nearly as important. But for triathletes, I think that whole recovery fuel thing is big. The other thing that I would like to touch on, and this is for both racing and as you get more into those higher intensity phases, is people who have sensitive stomachs and do have a hard time taking sugar in, taking in the branched chain carbohydrates, and like, I guess, to name a name brand is like UCAN. I'm a big believer in those types of products because you can preload a race situation or a workout situation to have a slow release of energy. And it does, there's science behind it that shows it's a slow release of energy, throughout the workout or throughout the race, which enables you to lighten your actual like pure sugar load a little bit, throughout the workout and throughout the race. Once again, I think that's probably a podcast in itself, but I'm a big believer in that. And I often have athletes preload, especially for races, but even for training, I find that stuff incredibly valuable.
Have you had any experience with athletes that may have sensitive stomachs using Morton, for example, and have that improved them?
Yes, it has. And that's the interesting thing about the Martins is it seems to, their technology of the encapsulation, it actually seems to work too. And I would say, I haven't seen enough like science on it and everything, but just verbal feedback from athletes, they seem to like that as well. So, I think that there's something there with that for sure.
I think the science is very equivocal on that, but I have had several athletes that with no hesitation, Morton has helped them tremendously when they've had issues before. So I think for certain individuals, it definitely works.
Yeah, no, for sure.
I think that's you can. I'm not sure if we can get it here in Europe. I know it's big in the US.
It's really big in the US, and you're right though. I'm not sure if you can get it in Europe. In fact, I had one of the East African runners that I coach who went home to Kenya, and they ran out of UCAN, and and I got a WhatsApp message that said, "Hey, so and so is traveling here, in 2 weeks. Can you make sure you get them, a shipment of UCAN to bring it over here?" And they're really because obviously you can't find it in Kenya either.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's start to wrap it up. Is there anything else that you want to mention, or do you want to kind of give your main take-home message for the audience to finish off?
No, I guess the big takeaway is what I started with is I really feel like nutrition should be periodized. Like I'm a big advocate of that. I'm not, an extreme, like you should be, calorically restrictive all the time. And I'm definitely not on, the opposite side of that where, you should be feeling with sugar, constantly and everything. Like I really do feel that a great approach is periodizing your nutrition plan as with the season and then planning accordingly. It's not easy. But if you're interested in high performance and doing, having your best races and everything, it's a great way to approach it.
Right, great. Well, thank you so much, Ryan. Hope to talk to you soon.
Yeah, you bet.
And finally, we have Coach Bjorn Kafka, who works a lot with cyclists at top level, mountain bikers, road cyclists, and so on. And he's also one of the brains behind the software AeroTune, which is a fantastic tool that I use and recommend. Bjorn was on the Triathlon Show in episode 286, and that was a super episode, one of the most downloaded in the recent year or so, I would say. Definitely worth checking it out. Bjorn is really a bit of a guru when it comes to metabolism, so it will be really interesting to hear what he has to say on this topic. I'm here with Bjorn Kafka to discuss workout fueling. Bjorn, welcome back. How are you doing?
Yeah, fine. I'm on a little road trip now through Slovenia and Croatia, so having a good time, and but always time for a little interview with you. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. That's very nice to hear. So let's just dive right in and start by, if you can give us a summary of your thoughts and general recommendations around workout fueling, and then we'll dive into some things in more detail after that.
Yeah. First of all, so when I start working with athletes, I always I try to find out if they have like some nutritional dogmas. So I always like beware of nutritional dogmas. Yeah. So low carb, keto, gluten free, any restrictive diet can really make more harm than good. Yeah. So of course, if there is some kind of benefit for the athlete, but most of the times I have the feeling it's more like a trend. Yeah. And it's fashionable to do these kind of things. So I just look if there is any dogma and then just try to avoid them and try to find out if it makes any sense for these athletes. So the next thing is eating. Eating in general, especially in endurance sport, is quite a problem. So we have more under eating than enough eating. We have problems with anorexia, stuff like that. Yeah. So eating enough is the next thing, and eating healthy. So really easy stuff. Yeah. Eating enough fibers, eating enough vegetables, and fueling. Yeah. And this is the next thing. What I see on daily basis, and I really have to teach my athletes really to eat enough carbs during the training. And it's sometimes kind of a magic for them. When they start eating carbs, they see, okay, I can hit the numbers, and I still feel good. And especially after the training, I feel, not totally beaten to the ground. So enough carbs in training, after training and before. And of course, in hitting enough protein, so the daily needs for an athlete is higher than like a normal person. So looking at that, and then the next thing is when we have like cleared out these things, I try to develop nutritional habits. Something like how to fuel during different workouts. It's not only like during the workout, or racing, for example. It's like how should you eat during these weeks when we train hard VO2 max intervals? How you should eat during a racing week, or maybe 3 weeks before a racing week. Yeah? So I try to develop these habits, and they should become like really something normal. Yeah? And another thing is also how should they eat during different climate situations. So when it's very hot, when it's very cold, and these kind of things. So they also should become like a normal thing. So when it's hot, I should eat more this, and when it's cold, I should eat more that. And the next thing is endurance sport. We have all these nice supplements, and nutritional supplements are, for me, as a coach, are always the icing on the cake. So before we start these things, citrulline malate, arginine, and all these other nice things you can use, the athlete needs kind of a robust foundation of how a good nutrition works. And after that, and this sometimes takes a year, some athletes, I don't start with it because they don't get the easy stuff right. So, but when I have the feeling and I can talk on a high level about nutrition with the athlete, I know, okay, then we can start with the nutritional supplements. That's if we take like the more like specific supplements, even like supplementing carbs. Easy to digest carbs are some kind of supplement for me. So this is the summary of how I work with this.
Yeah, that was a great summary. A lot of things there to digest, pun intended. And so the follow-up questions will be mostly related to specifically to fueling the workouts. We will also go into a little bit of pre and post-workout fueling. But when it comes to the fueling part, you mentioned there that you generally work with trying to get your athletes to fuel better, fuel more during the workouts, and that can be like magic. Recommendations for how much to consume first, and of course this can vary depending on intensity and duration. Can you go into that? Like what would those benchmarks be for how much to consume in workouts?
So what we do, or what I do as a coach, I always do the power test from Aerotune, which I developed. So I get an idea of how much carbs they need during different intensities. We always have to be clear that it's only like it's a static situation. If someone goes very hard, like above threshold and or even above VO2 max power output, it changed. It's not like a constant number. So when you start working out, you have another oxidation of carbohydrates or combustion then after 3 hours. So, but to have this number, for example, 50 grams of carbohydrates for 260 watts, this helps a lot. It's a start. That's the athletes gets sensible or get a feeling of how real eating works during different intensities, and that they know if I go 100% at, for example, threshold, I need really nearly 100% of carbs during these intervals. So and to get a step back. So when we talk about nutrition and also what you should consume during workouts, I always have my old colleague in mind from my times during the Bike magazine when I was working there as an editor. So he always said, okay, nutritional science seems to be very flexible. And he said it's 50% marketing, 40% voodoo science, and maybe 10% real science. And if you look back in how this science works, especially the last 30 years, he's somehow right. So we have crazy low carb trends, we have low fat trends, we have high fat trends, we have keto, we have gluten free, in some cases also like vegan. And I have this nice nutritional book from the 80s, and this guy recommended high carb, very low fat, very low protein. I'm talking about like 0.3 grams of protein, something like that. And in this case, it seemed to work. And he was working with high class athletes and they were very successful. And some years later, we have the complete opposite, low carb and things like that. So we always have to be aware of what science is telling us, and always looking back. So we are always, even me, are always influenced by marketing. So, but anyway, when we do these tests, the power tests, we have the VO2 max, we have the VLA max, and then we can calculate quite nicely. That fits also like the numbers when you're doing a spiral test, and how much grams of carbs and fats you need during different intensity, during this kind of climate. For example, 20 degrees, you need 50 grams of carbs. Take that, and then you have a good workout. This is how it works. And also having always the drinking in mind. Drink enough, having enough electrolytes. When you come from a very cold conditions, or you have a drastic climate change, remember eating more electrolytes until your body have adapted to that. And these things. But the first thing always eating enough carbs that are easy to digest during the workout. Yeah.
Yeah. What form of carbohydrate would you recommend, and what form of carbohydrates do your athletes typically consume when they're training?
Very simple. Always depending a little bit on the intensity and the duration. To make it very easy, the harder the workout, the easier to digest the carbs should be. So most of my athlete, even if they go easy, they consume in a liquid form. So they take they buy 10 kilos of maltodextrin and a little bit of fructose, and then they just have their scale and fueling the bottles. That's how it works. Very easy. It's quite cheap, and this is how they do it. Yeah. So only a little bit of maltodextrin and fructose. Always depending how good you tolerate that, the fructose. I personally, for example, I don't like to I'm not an athlete anymore, so I'm just riding for fun. Sometimes a little bit longer. I just buy a package of Haribos. I know how much grams of carbs I need during different power outputs, and if I say, okay, I go 220 watts, I need 40 grams. I just have my bag of Haribos, and I know, okay, I can go for 5 hours, and I eat them. Yeah, and I also go by feeling. If I feel like, okay, and now I'm getting a little bit like having this feeling of dizziness and stuff like that, I'm just eating a little bit more, and then it works out quite fine. But most of the times during easy rides, maltodextrin, a little bit of fructose, and very, very long sessions. Yeah, for example, when you go 12 hours or 18-hour rides, yes, I even train these kind of crazy guys who are doing Race Across America and things like that. We start consuming some protein in branched chain amino acids, stuff like that, to hit the daily protein intake, because, of course, if you're riding 12 hours a day, and they do that, you can't hit the numbers with protein because you're sitting all day long on the bike.
Yeah, no, that's good. And just to clarify for the listeners that might not be aware, the reason to buy maltodextrin and fructose separately is that it's just a lot cheaper than to buy a regular sports drink or gels, which are essentially maltodextrin and fructose. Most of them anyway these days. So that's a good option. Mm-hmm. So going back a little bit to the amounts, the AeroTune Power Test, I definitely recommend that to anybody who is serious about their training, and you get a nice table with anything from how much carbohydrate and fats you burn in 10-watt increments. You can look at 150, 160, 170, 260, 270, and so on and so forth, and see exactly how much you burn. So that's very nice. But for those athletes, there might be athletes that are maybe not quite as serious that they would do a test like that. Do you have any sort of general recommendations? We often hear about like 30 grams per hour is a kind of low intake, 60 grams, 50 or 60 as a moderate, or 80 to 90 as a high, or 80 to 100 as a high intake. Can you give some rules of thumb for athletes that don't do the testing to exactly see?
Like easy ride 2 hours. Yeah, easy ride 2 hours. It's like 40 grams. Yeah, it's fine. Mm-hmm. It works for most of the riders. 40 to 50 grams. I'm always like a little bit more than too little. Yeah. If you're like 50 kilos and not fit, and you, of course, can sustain on a very easy ride with 30 grams, but maybe taking a little bit more. And so I would say like 40 grams, maybe 50 grams. If you go to the mountains and you're not well trained, I would go up to 60, 70 grams. Yeah? Like a zone 2 tempo ride if you're going a little bit faster up the mountains. And always try to hit the intake when you know, okay, now there is a mountain, in 20 minutes, try to eat a little bit more so that you have like an easy diet to digest carbs, so that you have the hit in blood sugar during that time when you're going up. And if you go really hard in a race, 90 grams, even more. Yeah, if you can tolerate that, 100 grams, 120 grams. But with 90 grams, I think it's pretty good. If you go long, I would also say it depends on how fit you are. Some athletes go with like 50 grams, and it's no problem if they go 5 hours. But if you aren't fit and you go on a very long trip, you get fatigue, maybe also to heat. You lose your VO2 max capacity. You should consume more. Yeah. So to put it, to make it a little bit more easier, easy rides to maybe 2 hours, 3 hours, 40 grams, maybe 50 grams. Moderate hard rides, a little bit more, 60 grams. If there are some mountains in it, maybe 70 grams. If you go very hard intervals, go 80, 90 grams in racing too. Yeah. It's also a nice way to train your digestive system.
Yeah, great. And what is the duration of a ride that you would generally say that you don't need to fuel? Is it 1 hour or 1 hour 30, or where is the cutoff point for you?
Depending on how well you ate the days before. If you are totally underfueled for the last 2 days, I would say you can go maybe 45 minutes and then you immediately bonk. We all know that. But usually an easy recovery ride for maybe 1.5 hours you can do. Yeah, and if you go 1.5 hours and then start eating, it doesn't influence or hardly influence the oxidative of fats. So it's no problem to do that. What you also can do is like during an maybe zone 1 or even a zone 2 ride, to empty the glycogen stores before a race, maybe 2 days before that, but not longer than 1.5 hours. Yeah, you should not be bonking totally. But it always depends on how well you fueled during the days before. If you are totally fueled, usually it's no problem to go 1.5 hours on a fast ride. But I don't do it too often with my athletes, because they have so high training volume, only to maybe stimulate the rebound effect of glycogen storage before a race. Yes.
Is that? Do you ever do it? Can we go into that a little bit deeper? Like when you would prescribe fasted or low glycogen training, so before a race to empty the glycogen stores, and then is the idea of that to then you get a rebound effect and can super compensate with glycogen storage?
Yes. Yeah. This is it's more like this old kind of it's an easier way to like the Saltian diet. So it's not like the hardcore way to do that. It's more like I like to do like a longer ride 3 days before the race on not in fasted state, but more like in a little carb intake, maybe 40 grams, and doing like a 5-hour ride. So you feel pretty weak after that. And then you start eating like 6 grams per body weight, maybe 7 grams for the next 3 days. And then you're nicely fueled for the race. This is how I do it. And maybe also like for sometimes I do it, but you have to be very careful with that to have a nice impact on the VLMX, lowering it, so get a little bit more efficient on the fat metabolism. So doing it for 2 or 3 weeks before a race, but really, really careful, and only with very high VLMX riders, and because you don't want to sacrifice your digestive system, especially the use of carbs. Yeah. So suddenly you are only able to digest the 70 grams per hour. That would be a mess during a race. So you have to be careful with that, and maybe doing it like 2 or 3 times a week. And it's not a nice training. Yeah, so it's but it works sometimes quite fine with the riders, especially if they go on long distances. But be careful with that. I hardly do that. Yeah, because you can do more harm than good. Yeah. I do it with myself. Yeah. So
Well, that's it's always good as a coach to sometimes have yourself as a guinea pig to try things out on.
Yeah.
And then moving on to pre and post workout fueling. What are your thoughts around that?
So so the better the pre-fueling is, and also the fueling during the workout, the less, I wouldn't say important the post fueling is, but you can't make you limiting the mistakes you can make after a workout, especially in fueling. So my idea of a good workout fueling is always eating enough before the workout to hit the numbers, eating enough during the workout to have a good workout, and eating enough to not come into that state of being crazy about food. So getting home, haven't eaten enough during the race, during the training and before the training, coming home and start eating everything you have in your house, that would be not very clever. So you should come home with a good feeling and having your recovery shake, some carbs in that. I don't know, 60 grams of carbs, maybe 80 grams, depending on the intensity. Some protein, 20 grams. I would recommend maybe 25 grams. And then this is the first thing you drink after that. And then you start eating normal, also easy to digest, also depending on how hard and how long the training was. And then fuel again. And also always keep in mind, how is the training for the next 2 or 3 weeks? If you are like doing it kind of a block training, you are like in the state of, I don't know, maybe FTP work, and you are using a lot of carbs. You should fuel yourself with easy to digest carbs, and so that you can hit the numbers the next days. If you're like in the base training stuff and building a nice foundation, for example, for 6 weeks, can I have a nice content of high fibers, and the carb intake is of course important, but not so important. And so always look at the training that comes next. It's not always like the day, and it's always looking like I love to look like in more like bigger, in a bigger perspective of what we hit the next weeks, what kind of training. To get a good quality for the next 3 weeks. So, and also here, the pre-workout, I love to develop some kind of habits. So when we do hard workouts, I like to implement a breakfast, for example, with a very low fiber content. Maybe doing that for 3 or 5 days to get used to these kind of nutrition. That we have the same nutrition on race days, for example. Yeah. So we cut out, or we try to cut out most of the fibers during these days, and when to eat. Yeah. So we have a schedule like 3 hours before the training or the racing. We're eating low fiber, some rice, maybe mixed up with a little bit of MCT oil, making that cool overnight. To have like a different structure and starch, and putting some, I don't know, jam on it, and then eating it 3 hours before, and then go training. And after training, you also like hitting the right amount of protein. So over the day, like 2 grams of protein a day per body weight. And so this is like implementing habits of different situations, and try to sometimes simulate these kind of fueling strategies pre and post to get a feeling on how to use that during race days and race weeks.
Yeah,
That was a lot.
That-
It's a kind of mix up. Sorry for that.
No. That was a great rundown of a lot of things, but very clear. So I think that's about it. Let's start to wrap up. If you just could leave one sort of final take-home message, summarize or not summarize, but just give one or two important things to remember from all of this that you think is the most important for the listeners to remember.
Always eat carbs, or most of the time eat carbs during training. This is really the eye opener for most of the athletes. And if you feel weak and you want to hit numbers and you really feel kind of dizzy, it's most of the time because you're under fueling. And at training, and this is the next thing, and this is maybe because why low carb things become also quite popular. Some people, or not some, to be honest, a lot of endurance athletes like the feeling of being beaten down. So, and you can really hurt yourself a lot with low carb training, and you have this nice feeling of like being totally empty and laying on the couch. But training doesn't have to be like that. You can also feel good and refreshed after a training. This doesn't mean that the training was not effective. So always keep that in mind. Yeah, if you feel good and even feel good and not being too super tired after a training, the training can be very good. And always looking in the bigger perspective, if you do like a 3 weeks block of hard training and you feel after the first day or the second day of training, you already feel totally done, then you have done something wrong. Because even if you start the second week, you will not hit the numbers anymore. Or you will hit completely different systems and maybe lowering your VLA max instead of raising your VO2 max. So training doesn't have to feel awful if you eat enough.
I couldn't agree more. Totally agree with you on both of those points. Yeah. This has been great, Bjorn. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your vacation. I'll let you go back now and enjoy Croatia and Slovenia. It must be amazing over there. Hope you get in some nice rides as well and can enjoy the countries in that way.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Bjorn. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, and finally, let's get into my personal opinions, my rapid-fire overview on how I think about workout fueling. So I think that the fitter you are and the more you train overall, the more important workout fueling becomes. It's not just a function of any individual workout, it's a function of the sum of all of your workouts and basically the kilojoules that you expend over a period of weeks and months. And for very fit athletes that train at a high volume, you may need to fuel also very short workouts, just 1 hour easy rides, just because you might have 2 more workouts in the day. So fueling really is a function of duration and intensity, yes, but also of your overall fitness, your overall power output and energy expenditure, and the training volume. So for how long are you outputting that sort of expenditure? As a general rule of thumb that applies to, I would say, most about anybody, or let's put it this way, if I don't know anything about an athlete, then my general recommendation would be to fuel workouts that are 90 minutes or longer, regardless of intensity. And if a workout has a lot of intensity in it, in particular at or above threshold, then I would say to start fueling workouts that are shorter than that, maybe around 1 hour. As for what to consume, I think that workouts that are somewhat long and also intense, for those kinds of workouts, you want to be able to use what you consume in that same workout. So that means go for sources of carbohydrate that are quickly absorbed, like gels or sports drinks, or as Björn mentioned, the best option if you don't want to spend a fortune on gels, buy maltodextrin and fructose in bulk and make your own drink mix from that. Works great and is cheap. Depending on the duration of your workout and your sweat sodium concentration, you might also need to add electrolytes in there. I would personally definitely need to do that. For workouts that are not intense, I'm definitely never against fueling with, again, sports nutrition products or a maltodextrin mix. But you do also have the option for these kinds of workouts of using whole foods like bananas, rice cakes, and so on that has been mentioned in the interviews that we just heard. Because in those kinds of workouts, we're not really concerned about necessarily having to use the energy immediately in this workout, but we're simply making sure that you'll start to replenish your glycogen while you're already exercising, so that you don't deplete yourself, and so that you can arrive at your next workout without being depleted, put simply. So we're preparing for the next workout as much as having that energy be used in the workout that you're currently in when we're talking about these lower intensity workouts. For workouts that are short and intense, I do think that it makes sense to use faster acting fuels because you might actually run your glycogen stores really low even in a short amount of time if the intensity is high enough. So those exogenous carbohydrates, whether they are maltodextrin, gels, whatever it is, they will be used and useful in a workout like that, even if it's an hour or so. So that would be my recommendation for short and intense workouts. And regarding training on low glycogen, fasted training, I have experimented with this quite a bit myself as an athlete, and with quite a few other athletes that I coach as well. I wouldn't say that it doesn't work, but I have found it to be neutral, sometimes negative, more frequently than I find it to be positive in the cohort where I've attempted it. So again, it's not that it doesn't work, it clearly can work, but it's also a bit about what other training or performance in training that you have to give up to do that type of training. So it's an opportunity cost, put simply. So these days, I'm not really using it much. I'll try it with an athlete every once in a while, but that's with an experimenting mindset, seeing whether we get an incredible response from it. But I don't necessarily expect it to work. I expect it to only occasionally work well, and then we can keep doing it. But it's usually just a bit of an experiment, and it's not something that I will do with many athletes these days, to be honest. Absolutely not categorically against it, but it's just that compared to other tools in the toolbox, I find that I prefer using some other tools and tend to gravitate towards those and away from using a lot of fasted training or training in a state of low glycogen. So that wasn't necessarily super rapid fire, but I hope that it gave you a good overview of my personal thinking on the topic, and I hope that you enjoyed this episode and the episode format as a whole, and I'm very keen to get your feedback on it, so do email me and let me know what you think. As always, you can find the show notes on scientifictriathlon.com and links to all of the episodes that I've done previously individually with each of the coaches we heard from today, so check that out. And as I mentioned when I introduced Frank, we are working on a training camp together. So as you've heard already on the podcast, our Scientific Triathlon training camp will be on the 27th of March to the 1st of April 2022 in Mallorca. And Frank and Kaisa, his wife, are helping us. They are our local partners, and they are really knowledgeable in training camps and the logistics of things, have great partners with the hotels and everything there. So we will have a really, really good training camp with the help of Frank and Kaisa. And of course, their coaching knowledge as well will be super, super valuable for all of us to lean into. So I hope that I'll see as many of you as possible there. Go and check out more information about the camp on scientifictriathlon.com and register your interest if that sounds like it might be a good thing for you. Next Monday, I interview coach and researcher Mehdi Kordi about actually track cycling and track sprinting. So a bit of a different topic, but very, very interesting. And I have to say, it has been a long time since I learned so many new things as I did when interviewing Mehdi, just because I was completely clueless about how track cyclists train and things like that. But that was super fun. And I hope that you will enjoy that as well. We also have some research topics. Mehdi has done some research studies that we talk about, and we'll go into that in a bit more detail next Monday. Big thanks to our sponsors, Precision Hydration, that you can find on precisionhydration.com. Go and take their free online sweat test and get a personalized hydration strategy for next race, and get 15% off your first order with the promo code ThatTriathlonShow15 on precisionhydration.com. And thank you to Zen8. Use the Zen8 swim trainer to improve your technique, power, and stamina, and increase your swim stimulus frequency, even when you can't go to the pool or open water. Get 20% off your order on the swim trainer with the promo code that you can get on zen8swimtrainer.com/TTS. Thank you, as always, for listening. Keep training smart and keep loving triathlon.